Repotting your ZZ plant is one of the worst things you can do. They do seem to outgrow their pot pretty quick of course, and this normally leads folks to repotting them whenever they see the soil getting full, but this can be a disaster for your plant, and I'll show you exactly why in this video. A video that is sponsored by Squarespace by the way, but more on that in a jiffy. So I just bought this guy from my local B&Q, which is a big box store here in the UK if you're not familiar, and as you can see, he's a nice big fella, isn't he? Let's call him Frank. I do already have one of course, but this guy's not really done much growing in the last year or so, which is all my fault as you'll see a bit later. So I wanted a nice big specimen to proudly display in my home. This one is called Tony by the way. When shopping for Frank, the first thing I noticed when choosing which one to buy was how deformed the pot was. I mean, just look at it. The plastic nursery pot is meant to be nice and round, like the porcelain pot I've popped him into, but it's not. It's elliptical. But why is this? Well, if you've ever grown a ZZ plant before, then you'll know they grow their stems from massive potato-like rhizomes in the soil, and this pot is chock full of them. So much so that the pot is practically bursting at the seams like Arnold Schwarzenegger busting out of his t-shirt in his heyday, hence the weird shape of the pot. If you've never had a look at the rhizomes by the way, it's well worth popping out your guide to have a gander. It's unlike any houseplant, believe me. Anyway, it wasn't just Frank either. I hadn't picked up the most pot busting one to make a point. There was about 6 of his brethren to choose from and they all had the same thing. They did also have some much smaller ZZs and the pot busting was even worse with those. So this pot busting phenomenon is very common in the ZZ plant world. You might think that the thing to do here is to take the plant home and repot him straight away into much bigger accommodation, but this would be a massive mistake for our Frank. For a start, just look at the size of the pot he's calling home. It's not small, is it? It's very much in proportion with the rest of his body. If we go any bigger, then chances are he'll be out of his depth and he'll start to develop gangrene feet. A bigger pot will need more soil to fill it. More soil means longer drying times, which is a problem. You see, those rhizomes I talked about earlier hold tons of water for the stems to suckle on, and the last thing we want is for them to be sat in a sea of soil that takes a long time to dry out. It will turn them mushy, and when a rhizome starts to turn mushy, there's no turning back. It'll eventually rot and the stems attached to it will perish, and Frank will be in a world of pain. As you can see with my new best friend here, the soil is pretty wet already, but that's not me. I didn't come home and wet Frank's beak straight away. My years of looking after Tony taught me better thankfully. The store was probably watering Frank every day, which is a disaster for his long-term health, so I guess I rescued him from doom. Hopefully he'll thank me by behaving himself in my home. So, what's the plan with Frank then? First, let me tell you about the gift that keeps on giving, which is my free plant troubleshooting guide you can nab in the description. It's got all the common plant problems, why they happen, and then what to do about it. Check it out. So, Frank, the plan is to simply leave him be. Genius, eh? But what about the fact he's clearly busting out of his pot, and when a plant is root bound they start to get all fussy with things like yellowing leaves and slow growth? Yes, well, I'm saying Frank isn't really all that root bound. The giant rhizomes would lead you to believe he is, but just look how far I can stick my finger into Frank's private parts. All around the pot I'm having no trouble fingering him, and the soil is very loose, and this tells me that he was repotted into this not long ago and he's not anywhere near outgrowing it. If he was root bound, then I wouldn't be able to stick my finger in like this. There'll be roots in the way, and when I stick my probing I'm not hitting much resistance either. There are 3 levels to a root bound plant. Level 1 is something like this. Plenty of soil for the roots to still explore. You've got another 6 months on your side at least. This is level 2. Less soil, but still not really a great rush to repot. And then this is level 3. The roots have taken over and there's no soil left to party with. This needs repotting. I reckon Frank is only at level 2 at worst, and this is common for ZZ plants. They're less root bound than we tend to think they are. You're probably wondering why I don't just get him out of the pot and solve the mystery by having a peek. And the truth is, I don't want to get him out of this tight pot because it'll be a nightmare to get him back in. So I'm using my fingers as probes and I can feel that there is still soil knocking about. So when the bejesus should you actually repot your little guy? When you start to notice more and more roots in the pot and you can't get your finger in, then it's well worth popping him out and having a look. You might struggle to get the pot off him because of those meaty rhizomes, and in the past I've had to play surgeon and cut him out. If there's hardly any soil and it's all rhizomes and roots, then size him up, but don't go too big. A couple of sizes up will be grand. any bigger and your little pal won't thank you for it. So, let's talk about Tony for a second. Tony is the fella I've had for a good few years now, if you remember. I repotted Tony into his current accommodation about 2 years ago, and he's still enjoying the life of luxury with all that space around his private parts. Now, there are a couple of reasons why it's taken an age for Tony to size up that I'll share in a sec, but first, what soil did I pop him into?
Well, it goes back to rhizomes and moisture. The last thing we want is for the rhizomes to feel like they're constantly sat in a muddy puddle. It's great for Pepper and her friends, but not for our ZZ plant here. So this rules out heavy soils like compost, peat and soil. These hold on to moisture for too long.
We need a nice chunky mix that allows excess water to easily escape. Chunky soils have lots of air pockets, so dry out much quicker than peat mixes. What mix should it be then? Before that, let's talk about today's video sponsor, Squarespace. If you're looking to build a beautiful website or start an online store or even create a portfolio to showcase your work, then Squarespace has you covered. With their super easy to use templates and all-in-one platform, you can create a stunning website in minutes. And the beauty is, there's absolutely no coding required. Plus, they offer powerful analytics and marketing tools to help grow your online presence. And they've even got AI to help you create your website.
Head to squarespace.com to start your free trial today, and when you're ready to launch, use code Sheffield for 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain.
Now, if you're in the habit of making your own soil mix, then I recommend coconut coir as the base with a decent amount of perlite and some coconut husks to really chunk it up. I personally take away all the pain of making my own soil mix and just use Botanica's pre-made mixes. For Tony, I used their aroid mix and it's perfect. ZZ plants aren't aroids of course, but they pretty much have the same soil needs. Chunky as monkeys. I'm not sure what Frank is getting to call home, truth be told. It looks like some sort of peat mix and I can't see any perlite or coconut husks, but I'll keep an eye on him and be extra diligent with my watering. So, why is Tony stuck in stasis and failing to put on a growth spurt with nice chunky rhizomes and roots busting out of the pot? Basically, it's because I've done a number on him, and it's all to do with a common misconception about these plants.
These guys often top the list for the best low light plants to have in your home, don't they? You see it all the time. Stick them in a dark corner and they'll be fine. Hell, even stick them in the windowless downstairs loo to give the room some greenery and they won't mutter a complaint. They even love it, right? It's where they're destined to live. No, my plant friend. ZZ plants don't like low light. No plant does. They're pretty good at tolerating it, but that's it. Or they just take a long time to die.
And foolishly, this is what I've been doing. But in my defence, it wasn't by design. It's because I've just got far too many plants in my home that I'd run out of space for Tony. So I sat him on Mrs. Sheffield's desk hoping she wouldn't notice, but she pushed him right into this dimly lit corner and that's where he's called home ever since. Just look at how much of the sky Tony can see here. None. And this is bad. This is exactly why he's barely grown in 2 years. But this lack of growth isn't the only problem with low light, it's terrible for rhizomes too.
When a ZZ plant, or any other plant for that matter, sits in a low light spot all their life, they'll have a really hard time drying out their nappy quickly. Go check on a plant that is miles away from a window in your home. Now I bet the soil is pretty damp and you watered it at least a couple of weeks ago. A soggy ZZ plant sat in the corner of a dark room will be a suicidal one. So really, Tony should have been much nearer to a window and they'll have grown many more limbs and much more bulbous rhizomes by now.
Finding that spot is going to be tricky though. And for Frank actually. Maybe I'll just stick him here? Seems fine, she won't mind. Another great option that I really should have used on Tony looking back is sticking a Sansi grow light over him. Maybe one of these lights pointed down. Oh well, lesson learned I guess. Nab yourself an exclusive 25% discount off Sansi lights with my link in the description by the way.
So I mentioned earlier that it was my hunch that the lovely caring folk at the store were probably watering our ZZ friend every day or near enough every day anyway. I'm probably being unkind, but I'd imagine they go through every couple of days and just blanket wash all their plants in the houseplant section because it's the easy thing to do. If I was to continue this approach for our Frank, then I'll be digging a graveyard for him in the garden before long. We really don't want the soil to stay wet, as I've already bleated on about.
The golden rule is to check the soil first and only water when he's absolutely bone dry. Keeping Tony in this spot meant I hardly ever watered him. Seriously, it'd be months in between watering this guy. So much so that the soil is as dusty as the Sahara. But this is where a common mistake comes in with this plant. How to water, and often is completely wrong. When I do come round to watering Tony, I do it like this. No, not really. This is most definitely how you don't want to water him. Really, you want to water him like this. Drown your sucker until every inch of the soil is wet.
You see, your Zizi plant is an African. His native home is Eastern Africa in countries like Kenya and Tanzania and the surrounding areas. And these countries have long periods of drought followed by short bursts of rain. This means Zizi plants like Frank and Tony have evolved to store water in their thick rhizomes, making them drought tolerant.
So we should mimic this as much as possible by watering infrequently but deeply. Deeply means getting everything fully saturated and then don't do so again for ages. Overwatering is never about volume, it's all to do with frequency.
I go into tons more detail about how to water your plants at home, including a seriously nifty hack to rehydrate a hydrophobic plant that basically involves drowning it in this video here that you should definitely watch next, and I'll see you there.